I first came to Boston in '66. I'm really a proper Bostonian. I've stayed on the Cape. I've seen the herring runs. Some of my patients were on the Cape with cystic fibrosis from Harvard. And I just love this place. And so I was very, very happy to come here. And I want to especially thank Dr. Stephanie Wall, who is a noted pathologist, and I'm staying in her house. And really, this whole problem is medical. It's not to do with money, although we can talk about money and the like. I might actually start by talking about this book, which is for sale outside. I wrote an article for the Australian newspaper, which is owned by one Rupert Murdoch, a few years ago, and it was about nuclear power, and my editor from the New Press in New York wrote to me or rang me up and said, here's your new book. And each subject of each paragraph was another title for a chapter. And she said, can you write it in 6 weeks? And I stupidly said yes. I did it in 8 weeks, and it nearly killed me. But the first chapter deals with the fact that the nuclear industry says nuclear power is clean, green and sustainable. 3 lies. And I am getting very fed up with scientists who lie. You know, the planet is in the intensive care unit, acutely, critically ill. And if we lied in medicine about our patients, we would be deregistered and we would be damaging them and maybe killing them. It is inappropriate to lie to a society who is fairly scientifically and medically illiterate. In other words, I don't believe Rush Limbaugh should be on the air. I think freedom of speech is fine, except when the planet's dying and we're killing it, and we can't have people lying about what is happening to the planet. It's very, very important. We don't lie to our patients. It is totally inappropriate to lie about science. So the first chapter deals with the fact that nuclear power is undergirded by a huge industrial infrastructure. You don't just have pilgrims sitting there. You have millions of tons of uranium being mined, and the trucks are really half the size of this auditorium. You've never seen anything like them. And in Australia we have 40% of the world's uranium. And huge amounts of fossil fuel are used to mine uranium. And then you have to crush the uranium into very fine powder. That's more fossil fuel. Then the uranium is converted to a gas called uranium hexafluoride. And the uranium in the Western world is enriched in Paducah, Kentucky. And it takes 2 1,500 megawatt coal-fired plants to enrich the uranium. But don't forget, nuclear power produces no CO2. And 93% of the CFC gas emitted to the environment, which is 20,000 times more potent as a global warmer than CO2, is emitted from that uranium enrichment facility in Paducah, Kentucky. But don't forget, nuclear power produces no global warming gas. And so lies and lies and lies upon lies to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. They're even advertising now on NPR. And they call it underwriting, which is a euphemism for advertising. And I called the guy who is the president of NPR in Washington, who I know, he's Canadian. And I said, you know, you just must not be advertising nuclear power because it's a cancer-inducing industry. And we worked so hard to prevent cancer, well, mostly to save patients with cancer. But, you know, it's all about money. And anyway, so the first chapter deals with the fact that nuclear power contributes substantially to global warming. And the work was done by a wonderful man called Storm van Leeuwen, who's a Dutchman. The next chapter deals with money. The nuclear industry is a socialised industry, and you might think you're a capitalist country, but you're not. You're partly socialist. Ooh, communist maybe. Ooh, what a naughty word. The whole of the nuclear industry is subsidised and paid for by you. The mining of uranium is subsidised, the milling, enrichment. You pay for the whole thing. You pay for building the reactor. $12 billion now it costs to build a nuclear power plant, $12 to $15 billion. Wall Street won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But the tax dollars, and Obama, who is ignorant about nuclear power and is subsidised by the nuclear industry to get elected, he's allocated $8.3 billion to build 2 nuclear power plants down in Georgia. So you pay for the whole thing, you pay for the insurance. And that's called the Price-Anderson Act. You can't insure yourself or your house or your property against a nuclear accident. It's not possible. And the insurance, if there is a meltdown at Pilgrim, God help us, that money goes back into energy and you don't get it. And then we've got to decommission the reactor. That means cutting it apart when it's cooled down radiologically, and that will cost more than it costs to build the reactor. You'll pay for that. And then the storage of radioactive waste for 1 million years, you pay for that too. So it's a socialised industry like the Pentagon. You spend $1 trillion a year on death. It is. The Pentagon is about killing, let's be frank. And you don't even have a free medical care system. All because that's socialism. Ooh. In Australia, we have free medical care. I go to the doctor, I get treated, I pay my bill, I go next door, and the government puts the cash in my hand that I've just paid the doctor. State of the art, you go to a public hospital, operations, anaesthetists, the whole thing, free. That's called civilization. So, what I'm really saying is that the nuclear industry is fallacious, it doesn't go along with capitalism, you pay for it, and if you pay for it, it's your responsibility to close it down, and you can, okay? The rest of the book is about the medical implications of nuclear power, which I'm now going to teach you so that you understand the danger under which you're living. And I can't believe who actually built the Pilgrim reactors. What company? Do you know?
Boston Edison.
What? Boston Edison. Anyway, and you need to know that nuclear power is a Trojan horse for the weapons industry. And I wrote an article for the New York Times International Herald Tribune on December the 2nd, and there was a psychologist in the Department of Defense in 1952, and I'll paraphrase it. He said, we need peaceful nuclear power as kind of a camouflage for the weapons industry, right? But it's all the same technology. It's exactly the same. And the weapons makers knew right back in the 40s what they were getting into. And when Robert Oppenheimer watched the first bomb named Trinity, named after the Father, Son and Holy Ghost, fancy naming a bomb that, explode in the desert in Alamogordo, he muttered to himself, I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. Because he knew that capturing the energy inside the sun meant that we could destroy the planet, and we still can. So you have a reactor sitting at the entrance of Cape Cod. Fancy putting it there. You'll never get off. You'll never get off the Cape if there's an accident and a meltdown. 200,000 of you in the winter, 400,000 in the summer. I wish Teddy Kennedy was still alive because he was a really close friend of mine, and I wish he was alive because he would be here tonight. And I could teach Teddy what the dangers are. And I actually need half an hour with Obama, who's a very intelligent man. I had an hour and a quarter with Reagan, who wasn't so intelligent. I estimated his IQ clinically to be about 100, and I did diagnose that he had early Alzheimer's, but I did convince him over an hour and a quarter to actually realised nuclear war was bad for his health and your health, and then he started working with Gorbachev. I need half an hour with Obama, who's highly intelligent but knows no biology. Lawyers don't understand medicine or radiation or genetics. I know because my brother's a lawyer. Little bit of sibling rivalry there. Now let's start right at the beginning. I might actually bring this forward a little bit. Can you all see it? Okay, uranium is the raw material for nuclear power and weapons. And we in Australia have 40% of the world's richest uranium. Can you turn that spotlight off, please? It's in my eyes. Right off?
But then we can't see the board.
What?
No, you're talking about the screen?
No, this thing up here. Yeah, thanks. Okay, I mean, if you can shine it like that, that's good. Okay, uranium has two what we call isotopes, uranium-235 and uranium-238. And only uranium-235 is fissionable. In other words, you can split it apart, releasing the energy that Einstein developed, E equals mc squared. The energy released when you split the atom equals the mass of the atom times the speed of light squared. And Einstein developed that theory when he was watching a tram go by. I mean, talk about brilliance. At the end of his life, he really rued the day that he ever developed E equals mc squared, because he knew what that meant. So the uranium-235 is only present in 0.7%. Must be enriched to 3% for use in nuclear power. Over 50%, you've got bomb-grade material. Now that's why they're worried about Iran, because according to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the International Atomic Energy Agency, any country is allowed to have nuclear power, and in fact your companies are pushing nuclear power all over the world, to Saudi Arabia and to Syria and all sorts of countries. But when they build a nuclear power plant, they're allowed to have all the technology that goes along with it, but they're not allowed to build bombs. Well, how can you stop people building bombs if they have the technology to build bombs? Because once you can enrich uranium to 3%, you can enrich it above 50%, and you can make a bomb out of it, the uranium bomb. So to worry about Iran, that what they're doing is totally legal. And your 16 intelligence agencies in America say there's no evidence that Iran is building nuclear weapons. And I will get into Iran later if you remind me if I forget. Now, so they dig up all this uranium, and then, as I said, they turn it into a gas, uranium hexafluoride, which is nasty stuff. It's also a global warmer, and it's very corrosive. And they take it to Paducah, Kentucky, where they force it through a cascade of filters made of nickel, and with tiny pinholes. So when you force the gas through that, on one side stays the heavier atom, 238, and the other side collects 235. And there are actually hundreds or thousands of these nickel plates that they use. And at the end, you enrich the 235 to 3% for use in nuclear power. The nickel becomes very radioactive, but in fact the nuclear industry, nickel's very valuable as a metal. So they've developed a new law called below regulatory concern, and they're saying, well, you can recycle this nickel into children's teeth braces, hip replacements, belt buckles, jewellery, knives and forks, and all sorts of things. And if you go to scrap metal dealers, if they sometimes happen to have a Geiger counter, they're finding quite a lot of radioactive material in their scrap metal. And in fact Bed Bath and Beyond have found that the boxes containing tissue paper, not tissue, Kleenex. You mustn't ever wipe your nose on a Kleenex because it's a tree, and the trees are the lungs of the earth, because they absorb carbon dioxide and help to prevent global warming and create oxygen. So don't ever use a tissue or a paper towel in your kitchen. You're allowed to use toilet paper. And that's what I blow my nose on. It's a handkerchief, and it lasts me till I die if I don't lose it. And I wash it in the shower. And when mucus dies, the bacteria and viruses die. So this is a sterile, dry handkerchief. Okay? I'm really serious about this, but I'm not going to get into global warming today, except to talk about nuclear power contributing to global warming. So they're recycling the nickel. Now, there are literally hundreds of miles of pipes transferring the uranium hexafluoride, and it's very hot thermally. So beside the pipes are more pipes containing CFC gas, which, as you all know, is banned under the Montreal Protocol because it induces ozone depletion. And in Australia, where our ozone is very thin, 1 in 9 Australians now develop malignant melanoma, which is a very, very nasty cancer. When the mole becomes malignant, We have a huge, I mean, you should see the old people. They come into the dermatology clinics covered with skin cancers. And that's because our ozone's very thin, so it's been banned. However, the nuclear industry has been grandfathered out of the Montreal Protocol. I didn't know what that meant till I came to America, but it means they don't have to abide by the law. And so, as I said, 93% of the CFC 114 gas, the most common, released per year by America, comes from the uranium enrichment plant, which all adds to global warming. And there are other global warming gases too produced during the production of nuclear power. You don't hear about this, do you? No, so you're not being told the truth. And in medicine, we are obliged to tell you the truth. You know, if you have to have an operation, you have to sign a consent form, and we have to tell you all the complications that can arise if you have this procedure. But that's how we practice medicine now. And that's how we must practice global preventive medicine, by teaching people the truth. And it's inappropriate for corporations to lie. Okay, so that's enriching the uranium. Now, when the uranium is enriched to 3%, it's made into ceramic pellets like pieces of chalk. And then it's packed into fuel rods made of zirconium that are 12 feet long and half an inch thick. And all these pellets, this is at Pilgrim, are packed into the zirconium, 12 feet long. And then these fuel rods are taken along to the reactor. Does your reactor have a domed roof like that, or is it square? Well, I'll make it square. Doesn't matter. And in the reactor are packed 100 tons of uranium. 100 tons, like that. And it's all submerged in water, H2O. And between the rods are boron moderating rods that moderate the flux of neutrons. So as these are pulled out really slowly, so the uranium reaches critical mass, and uranium atoms normally shoot off neutrons like that. But when you have a critical mass of them, there's a huge flux of neutrons that start breaking everything apart, and the uranium atom, which is big, splits into 200 new pieces, all of which are radioactive elements, none of which existed before man fissioned the atom. Some last seconds and some last millions of years, and I'll describe some of them. So as they split apart, you're releasing E equals mc squared, which I described previously, tremendous heat. And the heat boils the water. The water is turned into steam, which is taken off by a pipe, turning a generator which generates electricity. So all a nuclear power plant is designed to do is to boil water. As Einstein said, nuclear power is a hell of a way to boil water. It's like cutting a pound of butter with a chainsaw, right? And all these radioactive elements are made. Now, the uranium becomes 1 billion times more radioactive in the reactor, 1 billion times. There's as much radiation in your reactor as that released by the explosion of 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. And every year they remove 1/3 of these spent fuel rods, which are so radioactive. If you stand next to one spent fuel rod, like a curtain rod, for a couple of seconds, you will get such a lethal dose of radiation, you'll die within 2 weeks with your hair falling out, vomiting, bloody diarrhea, and bleeding to death. They are terribly, terribly radioactive and hot. Each reactor needs 1 million gallons a minute of cooling water to circulate to keep it cool. And if you lose that, you get meltdowns. And I'll go into here at Fukushima soon. And so every year they remove 30 tons of these spent fuel rods, which are full of fission products and inefficient for the reaction. And they're stored, in your case, your reactor's a Mark 1, isn't it? GE Mark 1, just the same as Fukushima. How the hell they think they're going to keep it going, I don't know, because you need a revolution to close it down. I mean a revolution. And I don't mean suing them and going to court, because that's a perfect way to tie you up with money, energy, time, and you'll never win because the lawyers will beat you every time. And then they'll go to the Supreme Court, which they're going to do in Vermont. This is wicked. You have to rise up and close the thing down. How? I don't know, we'll work it out. Now, so on the roof of your reactor, God help us, which is like Fukushima, is stored about 30 times more radioactive material than in the reactor itself. Because your reactor's 40 years old, and it's old. And they've put all this spent fuel up there. It's thermally very hot. It must be continually cooled too, because if it's not, it will melt down. Do you know there's more cesium-137, which I'll describe in a minute, in your cooling pool at Pilgrim than all the cesium released by all the nuclear tests ever conducted in the history of the nuclear age? There is more cesium-137, and I'll describe that element, in your cooling pool at Pilgrim, more cesium than all the cesium released by all the nuclear tests conducted by Russia, America, China, England, France in the nuclear age. And if there's a meltdown in a cooling pool, man, it's going to be bad enough if there's a meltdown at that reactor. You'll never get out. You'll never escape. Fancy building. I mean, I remember when I was in Boston 20 years ago thinking, what did they build a reactor for? At the entrance of beautiful Cape Cod. And I know that the incidence of breast cancer on Cape Cod is very high. And I know that it's very high in Massachusetts, but it's higher here. I know insecticides and stuff are used, and DDT. But you know, the studies done by wonderful people here never looked at Pilgrim. That is really strange to me.
Politics.
What?
It was politics.
Politics? God help us, this is medicine. Do you know how hard we work to save a patient with breast cancer? You know that. And you know, most cancers we can't cure, let's be frank. And so the medical dictum states, if you have an incurable disease, the only recourse is prevention. We must prevent it. We must not have cancer factories sitting at the entrance to this beautiful cape, because that's what it is. Now, I'll just walk you through radiation and how it causes cancer and how it causes genetic disease, because it's all relevant to what I'm talking about. So, there are basically four sorts of radiation: ionizing radiation, X-rays. Hands up those here who've never had an X-ray. We've zapped you all. The biggest irradiators of the public at this time are doctors. Never have an unnecessary X-ray. All radiation is dangerous. There is no dose that is safe, despite the fact the nuclear industry continues to say it's below concern, don't worry, it's safe, it's dilute. It's a lie. Each dose you receive adds to your risk of getting cancer. It is cumulative. Never walk through those X-ray machines at the airport. I don't. I get a full body pat down. I don't care what orifices they want to explore, but I'm not going to walk through an X-ray machine. Do not have your teeth X-rayed every year. That's medically contraindicated. You do not need that. If you've got a sore tooth and an abscess, you need an X-ray. And be tough with your doctors. We are not God, although we sometimes pose as God. And I'll tell you a joke. This doctor died and he went up to heaven. And there was a huge queue, miles long. So he walked straight up to St. Peter and he said, "I'm a doctor." He said, "So?" And he said, "Well, we don't wait." And he said, "Sorry, up here, you're the same as everyone else back of the queue." And he's standing there for days, twiddling his thumbs, in a white coat with a stethoscope, walked straight up to the pearly gates and walked straight through. Well, this doctor got very aggravated and he went up to St. Peter and he said, "Look, you said doctors wait in line. I just saw this doctor walk straight through the pearly gates." He said, "Don't worry," he said, "that's not a doctor, that's God. He likes to play doctor sometimes." Okay, so X-rays. What you need to know are fetuses are thousands of times more radiosensitive than adults that get cancer. One X-ray to the pregnant abdomen doubles the incidence of cancer in that child. That's why when you're premenopausal and you go and have an X-ray, teeth, whatever, they say, "When was your last menstrual period?" And we don't X-ray people in the second half of the menstrual cycle because you could be pregnant and have a little tiny fetus there, okay? Children are 20 times more radiosensitive than adults, and little girls are twice as sensitive as little boys. We don't know why. So they're 40 times more radiosensitive. Women are 50% more sensitive than men. Immunocompromised patients are very sensitive to getting cancer from radiation. Old people are too. So what is happening at these airports, and I said, fetuses are going through these X-ray machines. Fetuses.
With babies.
And babies are going through, and children are standing there getting X-rayed. This is obscene. And I need to call the president of the AMA and tell him that these machines have to be banned. And there are people standing next to them, you know, these Homeland Security fellows. They're starting to get illnesses too now from, they say, from the radiation. So what the nuclear industry does is take a standard man for radiation exposure, which is a 70-kilogram white male in his 20s. What we should be doing is taking a standard fetus and saying no one can be exposed to any more, well, no one should be exposed to any radiation, okay? None. Medically contraindicated. Now, there's other sorts of radiation, gamma radiation, which is like X-rays. So you know when you go in and they say, take a deep breath, hold it, and the technician runs out and slams the door, and it goes zap. In that instant, you are irradiated. Your genes can be changed, but you do not become radioactive. Like when they irradiate food to kill a fungi and give them a longer shelf life, the food is not radioactive. However, radiolytic products are made that probably have nasty side effects and they may be carcinogenic. So gamma radiation is given off by radioactive elements in Pilgrim. Then there's alpha radiation, so that's particulate. It's composed of 2 protons. This is the GE symbol, right? Good things for life. GE makes good things for life like irons, stoves, refrigerators. Drying machines don't dry your clothes in a drying machine, dry them out in the sun and by the furnace in the winter. And they make nuclear power plants, and they make, like yours, and they make nuclear weapons, and they make nuclear missiles, and they're arming space. GE makes good things for life and death. Anyway, this is the symbol. 2 protons and 2 neutrons are emitted from an unstable atom that's called an alpha particle. And it doesn't travel very far, but it emits a hell of a dose of radiation to the surrounding cells. So I can hold an alpha emitter like plutonium or uranium in my hand, and it doesn't penetrate the layers of dead cells to damage the living cells in the dermis beneath. It can be blocked by a sheet of paper. But if you get it inside your body, it's extremely carcinogenic. The other one is a beta particle, which is an electron emitted from an unstable atom. Particulate. But they all do the same thing. They mutate genes. Now, what does that mean? In every cell of your body, there are chromosomes and the like, and the genes are on the chromosomes in the nucleus, and there is a gene that controls the rate of cell division called the regulatory gene, and it's a DNA molecule. So if it is hit by an alpha particle, and I got it that time, it's totally random, the gene sits quietly, the cell doesn't die, and you don't even know you've had a change in a gene. It's called a mutation. And it sits dormant for any time from 5 to 70 years. And one day, instead of the cell dividing by regulation and mitosis into 2, it goes crazy and produces trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of cells, and that's a cancer. So it takes a single alpha particle to hit a single gene in a single cell to kill you. But it's a silent killer, and you don't even know your gene has been mutated. And when you feel a lump in the breast or cough up some blood, it doesn't denote where it was made, like Hershey's chocolate you ate 20 years ago. Why? Hershey's is 13 miles from 3 Mile Island. It's where all the cars graze. The milk was full of radioactive iodine which decayed, but there are lots of other isotopes that got out. Don't eat Hershey's chocolates. I've been saying that for 30 years and they've never sued me. That's a shock, isn't it? But fancy building 2 nuclear power plants next to a chocolate factory. Talk about Charlie in the chocolate factory. Okay, so cancers do not denote where they come from. How do we know radiation causes cancer? Well, we took the Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors. America never treated them, never gave them health insurance, but they studied them. studied them, and from there we've derived much of our data for radiation exposure. But there are lots of exposed populations that we can examine and compare with non-exposed populations. The women who used to paint the dials of watches with radium-enriched paint, radium's an alpha emitter, very carcinogenic. It killed Madame Curie, who enriched uranium and used to walk around with a little bit in her lab coat pocket playing with it. She was so radioactive in the end, she almost glowed in the dark. She died of leukemia, her daughter died of leukemia. Her bones were packed with radium. The radium watch dial painters used to lick the paintbrushes to make them very pointy, so the figures were accurate. Many of those women died of bone cancer or leukemia. We have huge numbers of studies looking at people exposed to radiation. We know that it's very carcinogenic. Okay, so that's cancer. And you know, cancer cells are very aggressive and they'll invade a little lymph vessel, and one will go right up to your liver, one cancer cell, and grow into a second cancer, or to the brain, or into a blood vessel. And so cancer is a parasite, and it proliferates and grows throughout the body and metastasizes, and you can see a patient with cancer just shrinking before your very eyes. And when the patient dies, the cancer dies. Okay? And it's a silent killer, and the incubation time is 5 to 70 years, whereas with a cold it's 2 days. If I sneeze on you, in 2 days you're sneezing, okay? Measles, mumps, chickenpox, 3 weeks. But cancer is a long time, and that's the ace up the sleeve of the nuclear industry, the wicked nuclear industry. Now there are other cells in the body more important than normal body cells, and what are they? What are the other cells? What?
Germ cells.
Germ cells. What are germ cells? They're not germs. What? No. Eggs and sperm. Ooh, that's what we're really here for biologically, to reproduce. So the sperm and the eggs carry only half the number of chromosomes and genes, haploid. And so when the sperm gets into the egg, then you have a normal number. Now, radiation damages the genes in the eggs and sperm. And you know, over time, evolution, we were exposed to much higher levels of background radiation as we evolved. And radiation caused genes to mutate to become fish develop lungs, birds develop wings, and we, this magnificent species, evolved with our hind limbs, opposing thumbs, and brilliant neocortex. I happen to think we're an evolutionary aberrant. But it was radiation that induced evolution. But most mutations cause disease and death. Very few are advantageous. And it evolved over billions and billions of years, and we're filling the environment up with radiation now very fast. We all carry several hundred genes for disease. Cystic fibrosis, diabetes, inborn errors of metabolism, mental retardation. I've just found out no one else is to leave the room, even if you have to go to the bathroom, because it's boring. I have to try and keep you occupied, because what I'm telling you is fairly boring, but I don't want anyone else to go out, unless you really have to. Anyway. I have just found out I carry a gene for a disease called hemochromatosis, because my son has just been diagnosed with hemochromatosis, which is an abnormality in iron metabolism, and he can't excrete his iron. So it gets stored in the liver and the heart, and it can really damage people. I didn't know I carried it. I've been walking around for 40 years telling people that we all carry, and I do. And so does my ex-husband. And so you don't know you carry them till you mate with someone with the same gene, right? Most genes are recessive. For instance, you can only have blue eyes. Don't take any notice of him. You can only have blue eyes if you have 2 blue-eyed genes, because brown is dominant. So you get brown eyes if you have 1 brown-eyed gene and 1 blue, right? Brown eyes with 2 brown-eyed genes and blue eyes with 2 blue-eyed genes. So here's a quiz, and anyone who gets the right answer gets a prize at the end. 2 parents had blue eyes and they had a brown-eyed baby. Where did the brown-eyed gene come from?
The mailman.
The mailman, you get the prize. Now, There are 2,600 genetic diseases now described, all of which are going to increase in frequency down the time track as we mutate genes in the eggs and sperm from Pilgrim. Random, compulsory genetic engineering forevermore to create disease. And it takes sometimes 20 generations for a recessive gene that's been mutated to express itself when two of the same recessive genes get together. Do you understand? So it's long term. How do we know? Because there was a man called Muller who irradiated Drosophila fruit fly, which reproduce every couple of days. And genes for crooked wings and all sorts of abnormalities were produced and passed on. He could watch them down time track. We'll never see it. We'll be dead. But we extrapolate from animal experiments onto humans. That's how we learn about medicine and biology. And we're not the only one with genes. There are 30 million species that cohabit the planet with us, all of whom will be affected by nuclear power and radiation. Okay, so that's just a brief primer in mutation and cancer. Now, radioactive iodine. Where does that go in the body? Yeah, okay. Have you all got inert potassium iodides in your medicine cabinets here? Hands up those who have. And why haven't the rest of you?
Because they all got sold to Kansas.
What?
Because they all got sold to Kansas.
Why Kansas?
I don't know, but there was a run on it.
Who said that?
I heard on the news. You couldn't get it.
Well, you are, every person on the Cape must have potassium iodide tablets in your cabinet, and I'll tell you why. If there's a meltdown, and if they tell you in time, because usually they don't tell you till the clouds passed over you and you've inhaled the radioactive iodine and it's too late. But if they let you know just as the accident's occurring, you take your tablet of iodine, which is not radioactive, which saturates the thyroid gland, so when you inhale radioactive iodine, it won't go in there. Do you understand that? But it doesn't block any of the other elements that you're going to inhale and ingest in your food. Radioactive iodine has a half-life of 8 days. So that means if you start with a pound in 8 days, you have a quarter of a pound. In 8 more days, no, half a pound. In 8 more days, a quarter of a pound. In 8 more days, it decays exponentially. So in 10 weeks, it virtually has disappeared and not radioactive anymore. It's a beta emitter. You say beta, I say beta. You say potato, no, you say tomato, I say tomato. Right. Beta and a gamma emitter, and it's very nasty and highly radioactive. After 3 Mile Island, the milk around Hershey's chocolates from the cows was so radioactive, they powdered the milk for 10 weeks till the radioactive iodine decayed away to nothing, and then they used it for the chocolates. Huh? And that's in my book. A whistleblower told me that. But there were lots of other elements that got out too. Now let's talk about cesium-137. Cesium-137 is a beta, and gamma. It has a half-life of 30 years, which you multiply by 10 or 20 to get its total radiological dangerous life, which is about 600 years. Now, cesium-137 is like potassium, and every cell of the body is rich in potassium. So cesium goes to the brain where it causes nasty brain tumours like Teddy had. Tragedy. It causes terrible muscle sarcomas. It goes to the testicles and ovaries where it causes cancer of the ovary and testicle, and it mutates genes, of course, in the eggs and sperm. And I want you to put up the map now, please. Yeah, we need to turn the lights down, thanks. Okay, so this is Europe, folks, Europe. There's Chernobyl. And what happened was there was a stupid man who was an expert in hydroelectricity, not even a nuclear expert, who did a crazy experiment in the middle of the night, and there was a huge explosion and the control room filled up with white dust, and he told his 2 underlings to go out and see what happened. And they came back and they said to him, "It's gone." And he said, "Well, what's gone?" They said, "The reactor's gone." He said, "Don't be ridiculous, go and have another look." Oh, I didn't mean to do that. How do I get back? Yeah. And there was shucks. There was a fire that burnt for about 10 days because the control rods were not made of boron, they were made of graphite, like the stuff in a pencil, carbon, and it burnt like hell. Now, the really, really dark places are areas which are uninhabitable, because this is only looking at cesium, and remember there are several hundred elements coming out of this reactor, and they only have just mapped cesium. And the other areas are really high levels of fallout. Look, you can see all over Russia, the Ukraine, Belarus. Before the accident, 100% of the children in Belarus were healthy. Now only 20% are healthy. It was first picked up in Sweden by scientists, and Gorbachev didn't tell the world for 10 days that this had happened, and you can see they got a hell of a dose. There are over 300 farms in the United Kingdom whose lambs are so full of cesium-137 they can't be sold on the market. The government told them they have to close their farms down for 100 years, but it's not 100, it's 600 years. 600 years. Turkey got a hell of a fallout, and Turkey isn't illustrated on this map. No, it's not working. Oh, here. I don't know where Turkey is, it's down here somewhere. I've just been to Turkey, here, and the food, I don't buy Turkish food. I went into my health food shop the other day and I said, and there were apricots from Turkey, and I said, are these radioactive? He said, they're organic. So I called the man in Melbourne, Australia, who tests the food imported from Europe, and I said, how do you test it from radiation? He said, oh, we do random spot checks. The computer picks out certain batches and doesn't test them all. I said, what do you do when you find radioactive food? Oh, he said, we dilute it with non-radioactive food. For those who are biologists, you will understand that the solution to pollution by dilution is fallacious when it comes to radiation, because radiation reconcentrates back up the food chain by orders of magnitude in the grass and the milk and the meat, and we stand at the apex of the food chain. Or what's happening in Fukushima now, algae. Hundreds of times. Then the crustaceans eat the algae hundreds of times. Then the little fish eat the crustaceans. Then the big fish, which swim all the way over the Pacific to the west coast, have the highest concentration of radiation in their flesh. I went to a sushi restaurant the other night in New York, and everyone's very posh and drinking their wine and their sake, and the sushi chefs are working, you know, and I said, is this fish from Japan? And they said, yes. I said, what? Because fish up to 600 miles from Fukushima are found to have cesium in their flesh, plus other things. So I only ate some sushi from New Zealand and Maine. So this is what happens. One stupid man with one reactor, which had only been operating for a few months, has contaminated the whole of a continent. So don't even think about Pilgrim affecting you. Extrapolate that to America. And that's only cesium. That's not strontium-90 or plutonium or americium or neptunium or curium or einsteinium or technetium or carbon-14 or tritium or any of the others. Get that? These are wicked, wicked, wicked machines. And the food will be radioactive for hundreds of years. I do not buy European food. We don't have nuclear power in Australia because it's too dangerous for us. We just export uranium so you can have the joys of nuclear power. So our food is not radioactive. But look at this. And already we're seeing the incidence of cancer rising. In fact, the New York Academy of Sciences did a study last year. They translated 5,000 articles from the Russian literature, medical literature, epidemiology and the like. Over 1 million people have already died. Over 1 million people in the first 25 years. Fukushima is about 3 times worse in terms of radioactive release than Chernobyl. So you multiply 1 million by 3. And Japan's much more heavily populated than Europe and Chernobyl. I'll just finish. Can you turn that off and turn the light on, please? I want to talk about Strontium-90. You all heard about that when the fallout occurred, and Linus Pauling said children will get cancer from Strontium-90. Lasts for 28 years, it's around for 600, concentrates in bone and teeth because it's like calcium. And I knew Jerry Wiesner, who was Jack Kennedy's science advisor. And at that time, Linus Pauling and others were saying children would get cancer from the fallout. Do you remember the older people here when Russia and America were going hell for leather testing bombs? And the Women for Peace and the WILP were standing outside the White House with placards. And Jack was standing with the way he used to inside the Oval Office, and it was raining, and he was looking at the rain on the windows, and he said, "You mean, Jerry, there's radiation in that rain?" And Jerry said, "Yes, Mr. President." So that's when Jack Kennedy brought about the partial test ban treaty underground, so we didn't have radiation in the air, but they tested underground, so it was out of sight, out of mind. But that was brought about by mostly women who were worried about their children. So Strontium-90 is all over Europe. And the last one I'll talk about, but not least, is plutonium, which is why they fissioned the atom, named after not the dog, Pluto, but the god of the underworld. It is an alpha emitter. It is so toxic that a millionth of a gram, 10 to the minus 6 grams, will definitely give you cancer. But when they injected it into beagle dogs, they didn't find a dose low enough that didn't give all the dogs cancer. 10 to the minus 9 grams. And it's an iron analogue. The body thinks it's iron. So if you inhale it into your lung, here's a lung, here's a trachea, the bronchi, which branch like branches of a tree. It tends to land right here at the periphery, and because it's an alpha emitter, it only travels a little way, this alpha particle, irradiating a volume of cells, all of which die. But because radiation decreases with the square of the distance, on the periphery of that volume of necrotic cells remain cells that are viable. And almost certainly a regulatory gene will be mutated, and later on that person will get cancer. But what the industry does is take that dose from that tiny particle and average over both lung fields, and they say, oh, the dose is really low. They don't understand radiation biology. Do you understand that? Now, macrophages, white blood cells, come and grab that, and they take it to glands in the chest where you can get lymphoma, lymph glands. It's stored in the liver where it causes liver cancer. It goes to the bone because that's where the red blood cells are made, and you need iron for hemoglobin, so they think it's iron and it causes bone cancer or leukemia, like Teddy Kennedy's son had. It crosses the placenta, and like that drug thalidomide, will damage a cell that's going to form the left half of the brain or the right arm. Okay, so you've got a genetically chromosomally normal fetus who's damaged by radiation or thalidomide, the drug pregnant women took years ago. Remember, and babies were born without arms and legs? We used to have a sign saying plutonium is thalidomide forever because its half-life is 24,000, half a million years. And it's great stuff because you only need 10 pounds to make yourself a bomb. Each reactor makes 500 pounds of it a year, so theoretically any country with a nuclear power plant can make 100 bombs a year. No, 50 bombs a year. So America's exporting bomb factories all over the world, as well as cancer factories. Oh, but we're worried about proliferation of nuclear weapons, aren't we? Oh, but we've got to have cell nuclear power all over the world. Do you see how crazy and illogical and wicked the nuclear industry is? And Obama's worried about proliferation, even though of the 23,000 H-bombs in the world, Russia and America own 97%. And you target each other, even though you're now best friends, with thousands of weapons on hair trigger alert, which take half an hour to go from launch to land, and vice versa, and nuclear war's over in an hour. And we get close to such an event quite a few times every year. There are 1,000 people hacking per day into the early warning system and the Pentagon. And the reason we haven't had a nuclear war yet is that there's not been one intelligent 16-year-old boy with frontal lobes that are not well developed, and I've got a grandson like that, who would think it rather a kick to, hack into the early warning system and blow up the planet. And no one talks about that, do they? We'll talk about Pilgrim, we'll talk about breast cancer, we'll talk about DDT, but we're not talking about the fact that we're all sitting here ready to be blown up tonight. So this country has a case of collective psychosis, psychic numbing, and we're all walking towards a cliff like lemmings. And so we're practicing passive suicide, and we hospitalise suicidal patients. That's an aside. So plutonium, the other thing about plutonium is every male in the Northern Hemisphere has a predilection for testicles. So it deposits next to the cells that are going to form the sperm, and it will mutate genes that are passed on generation to generation, right? Meanwhile, if the man's cremated, and I don't believe in cremation because it adds to global warming, it's important to be buried in the soil without formalin in you, because formalin's a carcinogen and gets into the water supply. So you feed the worms. I'm going to be buried in a sheet so the worms can get to me while I'm soft. But don't get cremated because it, adds more to global warming. But out the chimney, if the man's cremated, goes plutonium, so another man can breathe it in and it can get into his testicles. So you can see an exponential increase in genetic disease. Okay, now I just want to talk about Pilgrim. Every day, what does Pilgrim emit? Now, every nuclear power plant has routine releases. Oh, it's just routine, don't worry. We're just injecting bacteria into your veins. It's just routine, don't worry. You might get septicemia, but it's just routine. I love the words they use. So here's Pilgrim, oh, it's square, that's right. And every day out comes tritium, because you can't store tritium, and every day 1 million picocuries of tritium are released from Pilgrim. Now, what is tritium? It's radioactive hydrogen. The only thing that stops tritium escaping is gold, because it's so dense. It gets out of everything else, stainless steel, glass, metal. And it's nasty stuff. So if you have an inversion system with fog around Pilgrim, the tritium combines with oxygen to form tritiated water, and it goes straight through your skin. The skin lets nothing through. It's the most important organ of our body. That means when you get burnt, you usually die. But tritium gets in. And it also can be inhaled into your lung, but also it combines in the food and concentrates in the food chain. Grass, goats, milk, meat, and us. And it's very, very nasty. It's a soft beta emitter, so it causes brain cancers and cancers all over the body, deformed fetuses, and there's a huge literature on tritium by the nuclear industry. They're scared stiff of it, but they say it's all right, it's only radioactive hydrogen. That's what they say. I mean, the people who scare the most out of me when I'm debating are the nuclear industry, because they lie. And they're so scary, these men. Either they don't know what they're talking about, or so I have kind of got a section in this book on tritium that you all must understand. Why is breast cancer higher? And the wind blows it all over the place, right? What else do they release? Carbon-14, which has this has got a half-life of 12.2 years. It's around for 100 years. Carbon-14, a half-life of over 5,000 years. It's around forever. That gets right into the DNA molecule, as does tritium. What else? They release xenon, krypton, and argon. These are called noble gases because they don't combine biochemically in the body. However, I used to use xenon in my patients for ventilation perfusion scans, but they're absorbed through the lung, through the alveoli, and these gases are very fat soluble. And the fat in the body is mostly the abdominal fat pad and upper thighs. They're very high energy gamma emitters like X-rays. And of course the gonads get irradiated. So if you live near here, your gonads are being irradiated by inhaling noble gases. And they just come out with impunity all the time, all the time. Also, the water that comes out of the reactor into the sea is relatively radioactive, and the radioactive elements, strontium and stuff, recombine back in the food chain and concentrate. So your fish are probably, some around here, radioactive. I heard a man used to eat oysters near Pilgrim, And someone told him that, I think Ernie Sternglass, that he would probably get thyroid cancer. 20 years later, he did get thyroid cancer. I wouldn't eat any seafood grown near Pilgrim at all, and it should be banned, and it should be being tested. So you live in great danger just from routine releases, just every day. No wonder there's a high incidence of cancer on your island. Well, it's not an island, is it? Yes, it's an island. So that's routine releases. Now, radioactive waste. Well, I did your cooling pool, and I talked about the danger of that. It's time I finished. What I want to do is to read you what a description of a meltdown at Indian Point, which is 35 miles from Manhattan, and you can extrapolate from that to yourselves. Indian Point, 92 to 100. And there's a whole description of a meltdown, how long it takes, and each stage is named. The first period, which lasts about 30 seconds, is called gap release, when the noble gases argon, krypton and xenon, radioactive iodine and cesium escape. The next part lasts a couple of hours. That's called an in-vessel phase. At this point, the meltdown becomes irreversible. Then the molten fuel hits the containment vessel and explodes. And I just want to read you what would happen. Now imagine this scene. Over 300,000 people are running and driving away from the stricken reactor along winding Westchester roads. You can extrapolate this to the Cape. Stuck at traffic lights and in traffic jams. All are in a state of panic, anxiety and acute disarray, trying to reach their children at schools, their spouses and mates. Then they begin to taste a strange metallic flavour in their mouths. They infer that with each breath exposes them to deadly radioactive gases. The radio blasts out dire warnings, yet nobody knows what they're doing and nobody is in control. What about Manhattan? Millions of people trapped as the bridges and the Midtown, Lincoln and Holland tunnels are totally blocked. People hiding in their apartments, hardly daring to breathe. Then I talk about potassium iodide. And as the material lands on the ground, the short-lived elements that last minutes are terribly radioactive, and they emit huge doses of gamma radiation, and that's called ground shine. So if you get out of your car, you'll be exposed to ground shine. And what the nuclear industry does is it only talks about external gamma radiation that I've described to you. It never talks about the radiation concentrating in your food, and when you eat your food, in goes the cesium into muscle or your brain. They don't talk about plutonium in your lung. Internal emitters are totally ignored by the nuclear industry, and they're lying to you all the time, including the International Atomic Energy Agency is lying to you. Fukushima, we'll just do a few slides now. Can we turn the lights off, please? And it's not working. Wait a minute. Oh, here it is. Okay, look, it looks great. Fukushima, 6 reactors, Mark 1 GE reactors like Pilgrim, all built on an earthquake fault. That's a good idea. They knew they were doing it. I knew the guys who designed these at GE in 1975, and they resigned and testified before the Congress. So they look all nice and pristine and hygienic. Here they are afterwards. Each one exploded. There were massive hydrogen explosions as the zirconium on the fuel rods reacts with water at great heat and creates hydrogen, and the hydrogen built up and, like the Hindenburg, exploded. And in fact, units 1, 2, 3 and 4, there were explosions in each. Next. Oh, I'm doing it. There it is. Well, look, smoking, and this is all radioactive stuff getting out. Huge amounts of radiation escaped. And this is one of the buildings, and trying to look into the building. Do you know the radiation levels in Seattle went up 40,000 times above normal levels? 40,000 times. People in Seattle got 5 hot particles in their lung per day, probably made of plutonium. The people in Tokyo got 10 per day. People are living in Tokyo in areas that were evacuated and after Chernobyl. Tokyo is extremely radioactive. There are 30 million people living there. This shows what happened on day 3. The radiation from Fukushima reaches across the Pacific. On day 6, it starts to hit the west coast. And on day 10, it's enveloping the west coast. There's so much radioactive iodine there was in the seaweed at Anaheim at Disneyland. It was just extremely radioactive. And this again shows the movement of the plume across the Pacific. This is 18th of March, 7 days after the accident. This is the 21st of March. It's now enveloping the United States. And then on the 24th of March, it's circling the globe. Incidentally, the air masses do not mix at the equator, so we don't get your fallout. But the fish swim thousands of miles. This shows what happened. Luckily for these are the elements I just talked about. Uranium, which is used in weapons in Iraq, where the incidence of severe congenital anomalies in Fallujah, where you used a hell of a lot, is gone up 25%, and the doctors are telling the women not to have babies who are born with no brains, single eyes, no arms, and the most gross deformities. Uranium has a half-life of 4.5 billion years, so you are having a nuclear war in the cradle of civilization where writing, arithmetic, and the law began. Here's plutonium I just described with a half-life I've described, used in hydrogen bombs, seeks liver, lung, bone, testicle, and fetus. Cesium-137 I described, Strontium-90 I described, Cobalt-60 I didn't, that's a very nasty one, and radioactive iodine. Radioactive iodine-129, incidentally, has a half-life of 17 million years. We're talking about just amazing. And this is interesting, these are the azaleas in the spring that had just come out after Fukushima, before Fukushima, and they're dead. And you can see these are the ginkgo trees, the maidenhair fern trees with dead spots. That's the radioactive fallout. And you extrapolate that to people's lungs. And in fact, a nuclear engineer collected car filters from engines in Tokyo and measured the radiation in them. They were brought back to America, and they were so radioactive they had to be buried in radioactive waste dumps. But they inhaled, the car filters, as much air per day as a human lung. These are some of the abnormalities from Chernobyl, which are also illustrated in the book from the New York Academy. This child with no eye, this is a severely deformed child with elephantiasis. There's Chernobyl with a new containment built over, which is very fragile, and these children are grossly retarded and deformed, and there are homes full of such children, full of them, around Chernobyl, such that we have never seen in the history of medicine or pediatrics. And this is interesting, it's the cover of the book on Chernobyl showing normal tree growth with the normal rings, and after Chernobyl the rings are very, very minute because the growth of the tree is inhibited. And there's a wonderful scientist, an evolutionary biologist, who's been looking at birds and insects and spiders around Chernobyl, and the birds have very small brains. The species are declining in numbers, and they have mutations like crooked beaks and white feathers and stuff, and so you extrapolate that to humans. And this is a study I commissioned called Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free. It's a roadmap. And the truth is that right now, all the available technology is here. It's extremely cheap. Solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, cogeneration, and above all, conservation. Americans waste 28% of the electricity they use. Americans have an awful sense of entitlement. They leave their lights on all night. If you go to Europe, you're in a hotel, and in 3 minutes the light automatically turns off in the corridor. Do not leave any lights on at night. You walk through those doors that open, they're global warming doors or they're carcinogenic doors. Don't use clothes dryers. Nuclear power induces 20% of the electricity you have. You waste 28%. Say no more. You can save it all. Turn all the lights off at night, all your computers, all your flashing lights. Dry your clothes outside in the sun in the summer and by the furnace in the winter. It's easy to save energy. So in fact, right now, by about 2030, you can be carbon-free, nuclear-free, which is very important because right now we're on the path to increasing the temperatures on the planet by 3 degrees centigrade by 2050 and 6 degrees centigrade by the end of the century, which is antithetical to life. We won't live. And you can see what's happening now to the climate. The meteorologists are saying it's hotter, the records are hotter now than they've ever seen in the history of record keeping. We're having rains in Australia like we've never had before. So it's very, very important, and this is the prescription for survival. You can download it from IEER.org, done by a brilliant plasma physicist. That's the answer. There's enough wind west of the Mississippi to supply the whole country with 3 times the electricity you currently need. Yeah, we'd have to upgrade the grid. Great, well, we'll employ hundreds of thousands of people. Jobs, GDP will go up. New Deal, Obama's New Deal. You know, it's all here. I've just been in California, not a single solar panel. Bathed in sun, what the hell is going on in this country? You know who's superseding you? China. Well, you're being left behind. Why? Because you're lazy and your corporations run your Congress. Let's be frank, the Congress is full of corporate prostitutes. That's what they are. And I'm sick of them. And it's time that you took over. Now, I've had something to do with the Occupy movement. I've spoken there. And what people don't understand is that in Australia, voting is compulsory. We get fined $100 if we don't vote. It's time that everyone voted, and if they don't vote, they should go and live in Yemen. Because it's a responsibility to live in a democracy. Now, voting isn't enough. Then you've got to know who your Congress people and senators are, have to go there every 2 weeks when they come home and teach them. Give them that book and say, if you don't read this book and learn it, you're out next time, you know, and that scares them. In other words, if you leave a vacuum by not educating your Congress people, into the vacuum move the corporations. So in fact, you're getting what you deserve. And now you've got to rise up and use your passion and your intensity and your love. And I guess there's no child or baby in the audience, but usually at this stage I find a baby because I'm a pediatrician. And I hold the baby up and I say, this is what I've been talking about. This is our future. And we leave to this baby and its descendants millions, hundreds of thousands of tons of radioactive waste which will leak into the food supply. And in the future, people will wake up in the morning, their breast milk will already be radioactive, their babies already being born deformed and getting cancer at the age of 6 instead of 60, so we could turn our lights on. And I know the passion everyone has, and I know everyone's really good inside, because when people who've lived wicked lives are dying, or their children are dying, they recant and tell me everything they've done. Everyone really knows the truth. Everyone is really altruistic and moral. And if I tell parents that their child has leukemia, the woman will often turn into a lioness. She'll sell a house, she'll take the kid to the Mayo Clinic, she'll take them to Germany, and she'll do everything she can, and the man, to save that baby's life. And that's what I've been talking about tonight, because I am a paediatrician and a physician. And I've been talking about global preventive medicine. And you will close this reactor down now. It's 40 years old, and it's like me. I've got a plaque in my aorta. I'm 73. As you get old, your pipes get rusty and corroded. The pipes are rusty and corroded there. If they enlarge and prolong its life another 20 years, it's so dangerous. Almost certainly will lead to a meltdown. You will not allow that to happen. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, no real concern. Who pays the Nuclear Regulatory Commission? The nuclear industry, they're shills. They don't worry about your safety, they worry about profit, $1 million a day selling electricity from that goddamn thing. Japan had 54 reactors, only one is functioning. They're okay. You don't need yours, period. And I could go into why you've got them. Well, I think it's to do with the reptilian midbrain in some men's minds that has a toxic reaction to testosterone, but I won't get into that now, which is why I called my previous book Missile Envy a la Freud. Thank you. Thank you. Now it's really late, but I'll take some questions. Just short, okay? Really pertinent questions about you, where you live, and your reactor, okay? Yes. Can she have the mic?
I live on Cape Cod.
Yeah, go.
Well, I live on Cape Cod now, but
Speak right into it.
I live on Cape Cod. I live in Howard, but I did live in Duxbury, and I was very, very active at one point. Got burned out. But I do know that there was a worst-case scenario in June of 1982, according to the Boston Edison's own documents, where it was worst-case scenario for the entire low-lying areas of Massachusetts.
From what?
Because they found radioactive resin beads on the roof of the reactor.
They blew their filters.
And it was all over the cars. It was everywhere, right. So we know that happened.
What were the elements? Do you know? Cesium? Strontium? What?
Cesium, 1 million times expected in the milk. You had the same in strontium and cranberries. All of them, but if you read the Radiological Environmental Monitoring Report of 82, which was published in 83, it was 1 million times across the board.
Well, so that report needs to be made by you public. And I do remember reading about the cranberry bogs. And I love cranberries, but every time I think of cranberries growing on Cape Cod, I get frightened.
You shouldn't worry though, because in the report it stated that the high levels in the milk was due to the fact that the cow was pregnant. But we went to the large animal expert at Tufts, and he assured us that cows had calves when they were pregnant, not radioactive isotopes.
Yeah.
NPR just recently had a story on thyroid cancer and the rapid increase of thyroid cancer. What's the cause of that?
What's the what? What's the what?
What would cause thyroid cancer?
Radioactive iodine. Okay, so I have to write an article for the New York Times next about the testing that occurred by America in Nevada in the Marshall Islands, and they just absolutely covered America with radioactive fallout, and they knew what they were doing. I mean, these people should be tried by the Nuremberg trials. The National Cancer Institute did a study, and 8,000 people developed thyroid cancer from those tests, but I'm sure it's much more, and they only looked at radioactive iodine, they didn't look at other elements either. This is absolutely criminal. And you know, someone said to me the other day, you know, in Germany they say, well, what were you doing, Daddy, during the war? Did you know the Jews were being carted off to the gas lines? Well, people are going to say, some years hence, well, what were you doing, Daddy, letting these reactors be built? And it's worse because it continues generations of generations of generations. Nuclear accidents never end. And I forgot to say that Fukushima isn't over. If Building 4 collapses, which is full of high-level radioactive fuel, they're going to have to evacuate Tokyo. And they're talking about that now in the Japanese press. And also, I'm going to evacuate my family from Boston if that happens. Yes?
Hi, my name is Lisa, and my brother lives 100 kilometers from Fukushima. He had bought a plane ticket to come to the U.S. 6 days after the collapse, and so he was able to get out. But he went back home because what happens is they don't have a way out. And so what I wanted to share was...
They don't what?
Well, people don't feel like they have any options when this happens. He doesn't see... There's such a sense of resigned desperation in Japan that people don't talk about this anymore. It's not in the news anymore. And what my brother says that someone who's very well connected with the UN says, that radioactive number 2 is in meltdown, they can't contain. It's not containable, but they're not saying any of that to the people. And so what I was going to say is, we can't continue to rely on the press to be watchdogs for these kinds of events, because they're not going to tell you any more than what they know. And if they don't know, they're not going to tell you.
You're absolutely right. So who's going to do it? No, answer me.
I don't know. I mean, I guess
You.
Yes.
You know, I came to your country in '78, right? I was a young Australian alien. And I was kind of stupid and naive. And most Americans said it's better to be dead than red. And I said, what, you'd rather be blown up in a nuclear war? Yeah, we don't want to be communist. And I thought, this is psychotic. So I mobilized 23,000 doctors, and we taught the American people that nuclear was bad for their health. And we dropped bombs on Boston, vaporized the whole of Boston and everything. In 5 years, 80% of Americans got it. Catholic bishops wrote a pastoral letter. They said they didn't think Jesus would approve of this. The Methodist bishops did, you know. And that was the Second American Revolution, led by me, a rather naive alien. Now, you're not an alien. You're an American. How old are you?
42.
Yeah, I was about that age when I did it. So go for it. I'm passing the torch to you. Okay? Go.
Oh, yes.
Talk right into it, love.
Sorry. No, I don't believe
Right in. You can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I don't really believe we can get rid of nuclear power just yet, but
Why?
I certainly don't want
Why?
it in certain areas. Because we have certain power needs at this moment in time. It's a matter of safety.
Whole hour and a half lecture and you haven't got it. And you failed. You get -5.
I want to know where we should put them if we had to make the decision.
Where you should put reactors?
Yes.
You must be joking.
And couldn't we simply power the refining process with nuclear power?
Put the next slide on, will you? The next slide.
private.
What?
Private.
It's all reactors all over your country. You're just littered with reactors. Okay, I'll take your question next because I'm frustrated.
Dr. Caldicott, do you have a website or somewhere where people
Yeah.
can link in? And all these young people use the internet. I think
Okay.
it's hard to digest. And
Yes, it is. I gave you too much information and I'm sorry.
No.
And I've been taped, so I've been flown. And you can take this and show it to all your communities throughout the Cape. All right? Everyone has to see this lecture. So this is your country. Look at it. It's great, eh? Now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the American government said all Americans have to evacuate within 50 miles of Fukushima. Not the Japanese, only Americans, right? So these are 50-mile evacuation zones. Look at them. Look, you are absolutely littered with reactors, especially on the East Coast. There are 13 surrounding Chicago. I held a conference called Nuclear Power and Children's Health in Chicago, and I rang the Archbishop, or Cardinal, whatever he was. And I said, please, can the Catholic Church participate? Because they're very Catholic in Chicago. And I got a call a few days later from his Monsignor, and he said, well, the Cardinal doesn't think he can really be involved in this. And I said, well, if there's a meltdown, he will be, number one. And number two, I thought you were for right to life. I thought you valued fetuses. Yeah. Sorry, your question was...
it was just a link that people can get on the internet.
Oh yeah, my website is
next.
my website is nuclearfreeplanet.org, nuclearfreeplanet.org, and I have a radio show which you must get played on the Cape called ifyoulovethisplanet.org, and I interview people all the time about nuclear power, right up to date with Fukushima. Okay? Yes.
Do you think there's a link between the dramatically increased rate of autism and autism spectrum disorders and radioactivity?
No.
You don't?
No, nor with immunisation. The man who did that has been deregistered, and he was a bad man, and the Lancet should never have published that article. Autism, I think, there's an increased rate, and there was actually an op-ed piece in the New York Times yesterday about it. We're recognising it more. We're calling things that we would have called children who are retarded and put them in homes and stuff, we're calling them autistic. So it's a sort of a grab bag of diagnoses caused by various things. Yeah. Yeah, you two, and then I'm going to end.
My name is Ted Boson. I'm from Plymouth. I'm the fellow who wrote you, who had the mussels in Warren Cove around the corner from the power plant about 25 years ago. That's about the same time you had come to Plymouth, and I came to that meeting, and I learned so much that day. You galvanized me to try to fight this power plant. I thank you for it. I will tell you that soon after that, Dr. Sternglass, who was doing an epidemiological study of the increased cancer incidence around Pilgrim and other plants, we had brought him to Plymouth to speak to us. I picked him up at the airport. He asked me if I was eating the shellfish in the harbor. I said, not anymore. I told him how much I had eaten those mussels in the years before, and he said, I'm sorry, son, in 20 years you're going to have thyroid cancer. I thought, well, you know, this man probably just very dedicated to his work, and he sees a victim everywhere, but in 20 years they took out my cancerous thyroid. So his prediction proved correct, but in that, at that time, I had sought the Department of Public Health Radiation Control Unit's lab here in Massachusetts to see what their testing was, what their results. I found out that they actually weren't doing any testing at the time. They gave me permission and showed me the protocol to strip 2 quarts of mussels, which I did. I brought it to the lab. They tested it. The radionuclides that they believed were from the plant, the people at the plant said, no, Chinese fallout.
Yeah, they always say that.
But I thought I'd share that.
Okay, well, I don't know what you're going to do, but if I lived here, I'd close the thing down. I would. And I'd use my body to do it. You know, you can do occupied Pilgrim, but they won't let you in because they're really scared you can produce a meltdown. And it's pretty easy to produce a meltdown. Don't go, I think the legal thing is so arduous and long-winded and involving and takes up all your energy, but you've got to close it down for your children. You've got to close it down. You know, the summer's coming. Take all your little children, you've got to work out how to get on television. Take all your little children and your babies, and it's a hot day, and surround Plymouth with thousands of them, and take their clothes off. They are so vulnerable to radiation, these little things, and that will bring the media, because the media likes to film naughty bits, right? They don't really care about, you know, you getting cancer and stuff, but you've got to think of classy things to do. I thought of an action called Babies Against the Pentagon, and when the Senate's debating nuclear weapons, release hundreds of naked toddlers into the Senate chamber. You know, and they could clean up the mess. The farmers, there was a bill about the farmers, and they were very annoyed, so they took hundreds of sheep and cows and stuff, and they put them all over the congressional steps, and they made a filthy mess, and all the cameras came, and they got their bill passed. So demonstrations don't work now, petitions don't really work, they don't care about petitions. But if you get on television and they say, why have you got all these naked children here, these beautiful, vulnerable children? Nudes, not nukes. Then you get on. I led a nude march down Van Ness with Patch Adams with 50 people years ago. And, you know, they didn't want to cover Y2K and the rollover, and there could be meltdowns and nuclear war. But they wanted to see the naughty bits, so we got in the New York Times. And as we marched down, someone started saying, nudes, not nukes. And you realise how vulnerable this beautiful human body is. to radiation and nuclear war. So use your imagination, be courageous, do what the people in Vermont are doing. Close this thing down. You can close it down. I'm absolutely sure you can. Thank you.